Hi, everybody. Kristi Lee, and the podcast you're about to hear, Worth Your Time, with myself and Dr. Rob Shumaker, features the president of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum, Mr. Joe Hale. It was recorded on a Monday. On the following Friday, Mr. Hale announced that he will be resigning as president of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum, but we felt that the podcast is so interesting and so informative. You're going to love it anyway, and we'd love to share it with you now, Mr. Joe Hale.
Welcome to Worth Your Time with your hosts from the nationally syndicated Bob and Tom Show, Kristi Lee, and the president and CEO of the Indianapolis Zoo, Dr. Rob Shumaker. Our mission to inform, entertain, and educate with guests from all aspects of life. We guarantee there isn't another podcast that features two hosts with such different backgrounds and discussions with remarkable people doing exceptional things. So let's get started. Here are your hosts, Kristi Lee and Dr. Rob Shumaker.
Kristi Lee, always glad to see you.
Dr. Rob Shumaker, it's a pleasure as well. Here we are once again, Worth Your Time, and our very special guest is
Joe Hale, our good friend, colleague, and buddy from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum.
That is correct.
And it is May in Indianapolis, and how could we not be talking about Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the Indianapolis 500, the IMS Museum? Come on now.
That's right. And I'm going to throw you under the bus a little bit.
Go ahead.
Because I grew up here and I went to school at St. Christopher's, so I was like spitting distance from the track my whole life, basically.
Don't spit.
I don't spit. I'm a girl. But no, I was using it as never mind. So it's in my blood.
Yep.
You know, the racing's in my blood. My husband, my children, everybody, my family. So I grew up around this. You did not.
I did not.
So you are not aware, I don't think, of the impact that the Indy 500 had all over the world.
No, not when I moved here. That's true. I can tell you as a kid, I remember watching the Indianapolis 500 on Wide World of Sports.
Yes, yes.
You would watch that and watch it on the old TVs, which I'll get back to later on in the conversation. But
and talk to our guests now.
We are. Hey, before we do that, just want to remind everybody, we have a new opportunity for everybody. You can watch or download anything that we have recorded that's now on YouTube.
Oh,
so
great.
Every single podcast is now on YouTube as well, Worth Your Time.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find us on YouTube, great videos on Instagram, TikTok, and download anywhere you can get your podcasts.
Yes, thanks
and as
to
you said,
Braden and William. Yeah.
Braden and William, good job, man.
Yeah,
our
thank you.
PR team. We are now actually in just about 50 countries. We get downloads in about 50 countries since we started a year ago.
That's his influence, not mine, trust me. He knows people all over the world, Joe, so it's pretty incredible. But that is wonderful.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. So did you grow up in Indiana?
I grew up in southern Indiana.
Okay.
Floyd Knobs.
Sure.
Suburb of New Albany.
Yeah.
Suburb of Louisville.
Isn't that the Fuzzy Zeller area?
Fuzzy. I knew his sister real well. Went
Yeah?
to school with
Okay.
her.
What's her name?
Her name was Beverly.
Not nearly as
Yeah.
easy.
You were expecting something silly like Wooly? Or
I wanted something good.
I do have a cousin named Woody Oaks from down there. So
that's
it's
wow.
Fuzzy Zeller. And
Yeah.
Oaks.
I played
Okay.
that golf course a lot. It's nice down there.
Yeah. So no, my dad was a mailman.
Okay.
So we could never go to the race, but we listened to it in the backyard like so many people do.
That's what we did.
Yeah.
Because here in the state of Indiana, you may not know this, it was blacked out. We could never watch the race.
Well,
They never allowed that.
I've lived here for 15 years. I know that now.
Now. But back when you were a kid, you didn't know that.
I didn't know that because I didn't live here.
So, right.
I do go to the race. It's phenomenal.
So we used to listen. It was chore weekend. That was the year. That was like, you worked out in the yard and planted flowers and you had a barbecue and you'd listen to it.
Memorial Day weekend. Always.
Everybody
Right.
did that.
Yeah.
Everybody did that.
Right.
But now it is known around the world. I mean, I may have told you this, Rob, before, but I was hiking in the rainforest in Borneo about 3 years ago. I check into this eco lodge, and the woman, I don't think speaks any English. I write down where I'm from, Indianapolis. She literally went, vroom, vroom.
Oh,
I'm going, you can't get away from it.
That's awesome.
That's what we're known for.
Great. Okay, so then you went to Hanover College.
Went to Hanover College.
Okay, and that's in southern Indiana, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
How did your career trajectory lead you to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum?
It was kind of
And it
circuitous.
hasn't been that long, right?
No.
Well, I've been there 5 years.
It's not that long.
That's
That's
not
an
that long.
amazing accomplishments in 5 years.
went to Hanover, and then I was working in Switzerland as swimming director of a camp, and my mother called and said, you need to get a real job, and you need to come back to Indiana and teach school. And so I was dating the woman who's now my wife, and she was going to come. We were going to live in Paris. We each saved $300, so we're going to live in Paris for the rest of our lives,
There
right?
you go.
$300.
Man, I love your vision.
And so I said, hey, I think I'm going to come back to Indiana and become a teacher. And she said, well, thanks, but I'll find somebody else to go to Europe, to Paris with, which she did, a girlfriend, luckily. And I came back. I was a school teacher, taught school here. We got married. We moved to Germany. I taught school, an American school there. A couple of years, came back, worked here in Indianapolis for the Indiana Arts Commission, went to New Harmony, Indiana, was the director down there of New Harmony, came back here, worked for the Arts Council. I was director of the Arts Council a million years ago here. And then I turned 30 and decided it was time to get a real job,
You did all that before you were 30?
Well, and then had 2 little kids, and I was making the big bucks then, about $7,000 a year. So I had to get a job. So I went into commercial real estate, and we did office buildings, then ended up with the Galbraith organization, which did what's now the Salesforce Tower. We developed that. And I leased that up and then got into architecture. And then I was director. I went to work for PSI Energy, which became Synergy Corp.
Sure.
And then that became Duke Energy. And I ran Cincinnati Gas and Electric Company. And we sold to Duke Energy. And then, Mark Miles has always been a good buddy of mine.
Okay.
Here.
You got to say who that is.
And we were kind of dividing our time out. We were out on Nantucket, and I was running the cultural center on Nantucket. Mark called and said, hey, you ever think about coming back? And I said, to do what? He said, run the Speedway Museum. I said, Mark, do you realize who you called? Did you misdial? I said, I love the 500, but I wouldn't exactly call myself a car guy. And he said, no, we just need somebody can come back and raise some money and do something about the image of this museum, because it really hadn't changed. Nothing had changed for quite a while. And I'll never forget my first week. There was a woman there, a couple, and older couple. And he said, I'm just in my happy place here, being among these cars. And I turned to his wife. I said, well, ma'am, what do you think? She said, do you really want to know? And I said, yes, I really want to know. She said, to me, this place looks like an indoor parking lot set in a middle school cafeteria with books on the wall. And I said, I don't know if that's the tagline we're going to use for a new museum, but you kind of nailed it. You kind of nailed it.
Yeah, she kind of did.
So now, say who Mark Miles is, so everybody know what he does.
Mark Miles, I've known Mark for about 50 years, and, we're involved in a lot of Penrod and stuff like that here in town. And, he went on to run the ATP, which was the worldwide tennis group. And we stayed in touch. And then they moved back here and we had moved away. But Mark is now the CEO of Penske Entertainment.
Correct.
And so he's running all the, overseeing a lot of the races for Roger, IndyCar and all of that. And so he said, would you come back? And I said, what a cool opportunity at this point in life to be able to learn something completely new, a completely new industry. And I thought, what a great challenge that would be too, because that museum hadn't changed. You got to,
oh, no.
Kristi, you've been there,
Well, I was there when it was on the corner where the office building is now. I
want to know how far you can spit, because that's incredible.
Well,
you can spit to the track.
All the way from St. Chris on 16th Street, which is a grade school near the track, for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about. So what I was going to ask about is your first of all, before we get back to the track, you have quite the wanderlust, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My wonderful wife, she lets me take an adventure every year.
That's so fun.
And so, I've been to about 100 countries now. And
does she go with you, or is this a guide
These
trip
are things
thing?
she probably would not want to go to.
Okay.
Go with me.
All right.
So kind of hiking in Bhutan or, last year.
Have you hiked in Bhutan?
I have not hiked in Bhutan. I have hiked in Indonesia, but not Bhutan.
Have you guys done these adventures together yet?
Not yet.
Oh,
I think
I know we
should.
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 We should. I have a feeling we stayed in the same place.
Last year it was Madagascar, Zanzibar, Sri Lanka.
Sounds like right up your
the
area.
lemurs.
I know,
You've probably taken groups over.
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh yeah. Well, lots of places, but those are phenomenal places to visit and support. You do so much good by being a tourist in those parts of the world. What a good thing.
What was your favorite place?
I used to run a lot of marathons, and so I was raising money for the March of Dimes. My mother got polio when she was 9 months pregnant with me, so I was born, she was in an iron lung, paralyzed from the neck down. So the March of Dimes actually came because my dad was a mailman, so we didn't have a lot of discretionary income. They actually paid for her to go to Warm Springs, Georgia, which was where President Roosevelt had established kind of a center for people with polio who were paralyzed to be able to kind of live as independently as they could. So I decided, I was on the national board of the March of Dimes. I thought, what can I do to raise money? And I was running a lot, And so I thought, I'll run 7 marathons, 7 continents in 7 months, because at that point, that was kind of unusual. Now guys with private jets can do it all in 7 days.
Wow.
But that was kind of unusual. So the second one, there's a marathon in Antarctica every 2 years. And we got on a Russian icebreaker to go down there. And, you go across the Drake Lake, which you hope is a lake. But when I did it, it was so bad that this is no lie. There were seatbelts on the beds it was a Russian nuclear icebreaker that we went down there on. So it was not luxurious like it is these days. You strapped yourself in, and there was a sign on the desk, and it said, if you're outside and you happen to fall overboard, our recommendation is that you immediately swim for the bottom, because you'll die quicker than if you try to surface and then bob around, because there's no way we're going to be able to turn around and come get you.
Whoa.
So they said swim for the bottom. But the reason I'm telling you that is I just found Antarctica to be one of the most beautiful, naturally beautiful places. The icebergs are sculptures sitting there in the water. It's just so incredibly beautiful.
So you ended up running on icebergs?
Well, you ran on Antarctica, and you can't get within. Rob probably knows this. You can't get within 15 feet of a penguin. There were damn penguins, all over the place. So you were like zigzagging everywhere, and then it was springtime in Antarctica. So your feet would go down in the mud. You bring them out, and your shoe was still in the mud, so you had to get it. I was not a fast marathoner. I was like 3.5, 4 hour marathoner. But the guy that won it did it in 6.5 hours, and he was usually like a 2:20 guy.
Whoa.
So it took a long time, but it was kind of cool to do it down
That is
there.
incredible.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
What were we talking about? Museum? Forget that.
I don't know.
We're going to do our travel show.
The world travel.
That is
show.
really
That's pretty incredible.
amazing.
Dodging
Amazing
penguins.
Okay. So now we're back to Indy.
Yeah. So
Indy
Mark
in the month
convinced
of
me to
May.
come back.
You ran back to Indianapolis.
I'm
back
glad
here.
Mark did. Now, when you got here, what year did the museum start?
56, right? Yeah.
1956. It was a little corner place at 16th and Georgetown Road.
Mm-hmm.
I remember as a baby, because I'm really young, as a real baby, we would go there.
Yeah, like barely born.
Yeah,
right?
barely born. Really, I was little. Then it moved to its current location, which is inside the
76.
track in
76.
And I graduated from high school in 78, so I didn't do much at the museum there. I was outside in the snake pit, but that's another story. So it had, honestly, the inside of that building had not really changed since 1976.
Right.
So original. Before you started the renovation, it was original?
Well, from 76.
Yeah.
And
From
nothing had
76.
been touched.
Pretty much.
And it had... Can you describe it?
Well, it was
Because, yeah.
it was an indoor parking
Beside the
lot.
parking
in the
lot.
middle
What
school.
Yeah, the
purpose
middle
is
school
this?
cafeteria, right.
No, I mean, I remember the first day I got there, and it was during COVID, which was kind of weird. But everybody was, masked up and in the atrium. Remember the glass atrium? And I just remember there were 7 buckets sitting around because the atrium leaked, and they had to put buckets on the floor to catch the water every time it rained. I thought, this place does need a little bit of an overhaul. So I started in January of about 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, I guess. And, I was tasked with doing something about the museum. And, keep in mind, the museum is completely separate from IMS. A lot of people don't realize
a lot of
that.
people do not know
But we're
that.
a separate 501c3.
Even though on the grounds,
Rogers
but
our
separate.
landlord.
Yeah.
Right.
And a benevolent landlord, but we are separate. We got to pay our own expenses, pay our operating and all that. So I something needed to be done, obviously.
You need to raise money. You're a foundation.
Yeah. And they took a swat at that like in 2016. I think the numbers came in so high. Tony George was the chairman of the board then, and the numbers came in so high they just decided to postpone it. So then when Roger bought the track, and I actually knew Roger and Kathy because they have a home on Nantucket too, so I knew them from out there, and Kathy Penske was on my board of the cultural center that I was running out in Nantucket. So I knew him, not well, but I knew him. And so I kind of knew what I was coming getting involved in here, and I knew we had to raise money. And I'll never forget, the first week I had a friend of mine, Jack Rouse, come over from Cincinnati, and Jack ran Jack Rouse Associates. He had started Kings Island, then he went on to do like Legoland, and then he did the Ferrari World in Abu Dhabi, and he did the Volvo Museum in Sweden, the Volkswagen Museum, and he'd done a lot. And I asked him to come over. It was during COVID, and we were closed. I said, just walk through it with me. And he just, he started throwing out all these ideas of what it could be. And we went to McDonald's and sat in the car with the windows down because there was, you couldn't even go inside to have your hamburger. And I said, Jack, you've inspired me so much, and I'm going to have you back someday and show you what's actually happened. He actually came back last Wednesday, and he hadn't been there since. He's 85 years old now, and he just was kind of blown away because a lot of the ideas that he came up with is what we ended up doing. So it's kind of cool to have him back.
So when you came on board, none of the wheels were in motion to change the museum?
No.
That's incredible. You did all this in less than 5 years?
Well, we came in and they were just finishing their annual fund drive for the museum.
Right.
I said, wow, okay, how'd you do? And they said, better than we've ever done before. We raised $7,000 from 50 donors. Thought, wow, there's kind of an opportunity
to
here.
Move up.
Because so many people love that place, and it's so iconic, and our reputation in a way is so tied to it. I mean, now of course it's Rob Zoo, but I actually chaired the first fundraiser at Rob Zoo 1,000,000 years ago with Mary Claire Broad. But it's so iconic in Indiana, and it is, for the most part, what we're known for worldwide, regardless of where you are. And I thought, God, there's a real opportunity there. So, I just started talking to people, and I'm a real hands-on guy. I called everyone who had ever given any money to the museum. I thanked them for it, said, what do you think of the place? Trying to get their ideas. And then we, Rob knows this as well as anybody. It just was meeting after meeting after meeting. And, people all agreed that something had to be done. So we brought some smart people in and started coming up with a plan, and we had a budget. And, it ended up that we announced a campaign for $89 million. It was going to be 64 for the museum, 15 for a new restoration shop, because we have a complete restoration team that keeps our cars running, and then $10 million for an endowment. And at the museum at the time was selling some cars that had nothing to do with the mission on this thing called Bring a Trailer, and making some money, not huge money. But at the same time, I always thought it was curious that there were some of the coolest cars in the museum's collection were in the basement, but they didn't allow anybody to go in the basement.
Oh, yeah.
So when I got there, they were losing money. I thought, we got to find a way to make some money. And I started talking to some of my old friends that I knew from before at the endowment, Lilly Endowment. And, they said, well, what can we do to help? And I said, nothing. I said, we don't have a strategic plan. We're losing money. There's very little diversity on our board. I said, I don't think I'd fund us right now if I were you, but I'd love to keep in touch with you. So we started having quarterly lunches, and I bring them up to date. And, finally, after about a year and a half, they said, okay, we're going to help you whether or not you want it or not, in so many words.
That's nice.
And I said, well, that is nice, but let's do a feasibility study, see what the building can accommodate, what we can do. And they wanted it matched. I understand that. And so I thought, well, we don't have any money. How can I match it? So that basement that had the cool cars in it, I thought, well, let's open up the basement. We'll do the basement collection, and we'll let 6 people at a time go down there, and we'll take away their phones so they can't take pictures. It'll be docent led for 30 minutes, and we'll charge them $150 a person. So in the first year, we made $400,000.
I was one of those people.
I know you were. We made $400,000 that then allowed us to start doing some feasibility studies to see what the building could accommodate, and we kind of took off from there. So it's the $64 million. We just opened, obviously, 3 weeks ago, and we did bring the museum in at $60.5 million. So we came in $3.5 million under budget and on schedule.
Great. Yeah.
So, I love the conceptual part of figuring out an exhibit, or never mind a whole museum. So I'm really curious, and help me, because I'm trying to understand this. The original concept back, before you did the renovation, was it intended to be, and I mean this honestly, just asking, not as a criticism, was it intended to create kind of a time capsule to kind of store artifacts and talk about history? Was that more the agenda at that time?
Well, that's one way to put it, Rob. it was kind of a parking lot. When you walked in, you saw the whole museum. There was no sense of discovery or a path to follow. It was they're the cars, and they're winning cars. And if you're a car guy, you love that.
Okay.
But we had the car guys, the car people. I wanted to get their families. I wanted to get their parents, the kids. Nothing for kids to do. When a kid came into our museum, all they heard was, don't touch that, don't touch that, don't touch that. And, we wanted to start storytelling. And because there's so many stories to tell. And so those cars that were in the basement, many of them had nothing to do with the mission of the 500.
Oh, wow.
And there was a Mercedes in there, that WM196 Mercedes. It was worth a lot of money. We knew it. There was only so many of them made, and as kind of a relative of that car sold 2 years ago for $148 million. Then we had the last Ferrari to win Le Mans, and that was a very valuable car. So we said, if these cars have nothing to do with our mission, why don't we sell them and take that money and do something with it? Now, when you sell an asset from a museum, the proceeds can only be used for two things: to care for the collection or to add to your collection. You can't build a building with it. So we knew we still had to raise that $64 million for that. But we thought, well, what if we do sell some cars? So to make a long story short, we had, 14 cars that we wanted to sell. We ended up selling in February. We sold that Ferrari in Stuttgart, Germany, at the world headquarters of Mercedes for $52 million. The next weekend, we went to the Louvre in Paris, where we sold the Ferrari inside the Louvre. Sotheby's was doing these for us, made $32 million. Then the other cars we sold 2 weeks later down in Moda, Miami, and we made about $30 million for that. So we ended up with $111 million in an endowment. So that really takes care, almost guarantees the sustainability of this museum for generations to come. And then we were able to go out and raise the $64 million for the museum. We actually raised $69 million, and so we're going to use the rest of that leftover to kick off a new restoration shop that we want to announce here soon that'll house 150 cars, 6-bay, 8-bay restoration, an event space for 200 people. So that's kind of phase two.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't want to gloss over it, because that's remarkable that you raised that amount of money in that short of time. And, we've known each other for years, and I knew when you were in the middle of it. I don't want to gloss over that. That's an incredible achievement. Congratulations.
Thanks. So
really good.
A lot of people worked on that.
It is incredible. But as an outsider who knew about those cars in that basement, my question has always been, where did they come from? How did you end up with $111 million worth of cars sitting in a basement?
A lot of them were Tony Hellman's. And
really?
Mr. Benz from Mercedes-Benz had actually gifted that Mercedes to him. And so, but they had nothing to do with the mission.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
But a lot of people didn't feel that way. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
We got some pushback on that. But I think when we said, we're going to use the proceeds to benefit the museum. And obviously, the people that are listening to this now know that what we did is turn around and we kept our word, because we just purchased, as people may have heard, 5 new Indy 500 winning cars that were from the last 30 years, a Brickyard winner, and several other really important cars from Chip Ganassi.
Okay.
So we were able to keep our word. Yeah, we made a lot of money on this, but we're going to reinvest it in the museum and the collection.
And that's great. That's really
so,
great.
Hey, Joe, you've talked about your mission several times. Can you articulate what the mission is now? Obviously different than the 1976 version of the museum.
Well, it's really to preserve and tell the stories of the 500.
Great.
It's all 500 related. And, when you come to the museum now, you walk through Gasoline Alley and you really see the evolution of design, of technology of the cars, because, you've got 7 different garages representing 7 different eras of the 500. And across from those are all these display cases that we've had 55,000 artifacts that we've never had a place to exhibit before. And so they relate to the garage that's across from them. And then you go into that starting line experience, which is just stunning.
May I stop you here?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to take a break and come back. And I want to walk through the new museum with Joe.
Yeah, I want to do that too, because I have questions too.
Yeah, I have some questions about that because, we can tell everybody about, how to get tickets and all of those things. But I really want to go in depth with the actual museum itself and all of the wonderful exhibits that you do have there, because it is completely different.
And keep in mind, Kristi, 80% of our guests come from outside of Indiana.
Sure.
And 20% of those come from outside the United States. So we're really a bucket list destination. And, we got to get it right the first time because a lot of these people are never going to come back again. That's what we've been working on.
Well, the word of mouth has been strong, so I don't think you're going to have any problem. It's wow. It's the wow factor.
It's an incredible addition to the city, but, and I want to get your perspective later on, but an incredible addition to the museums in the country. It's stunning. Stunning.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We'll be back with more from Joe Hale, who's president of the IMS Museum.
You've been listening to Worth Your Time with Dr. Rob Shumaker and Kristi Lee. If you like what you hear, please give a review wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. Word of mouth is the best compliment. Thanks to our producers, Chris Spangle of Leaders and Legends, LLC. You can reach him at leadersandlegends.net. Also, thanks to Sophie Ritz. I'm Christopher Geisen. Thanks for joining us.